for accessibility reasons, obviously. I do think that, make metal straws more available. Of course, you probably could stab people with those too, so you've got to be
Exactly, that's
careful.
what happened.
My bugbear with this is the new morality, right? And I've said this on the show before, that I'm not in favour of standing in the checkout aisle and casting aspersions or even attempting to put myself in the shoes of the person standing next to me buying straws, plastic straws, and kind of imposing a moral...
Why not? It's the simplest thing you could do for the environment. It's an act of symbolism.
Yeah,
It's
absolutely.
an act of protest that you could do, easy.
Yeah, and so internal motivation, like for example, we've got rid of mainly using plastic milk bottles at home. That seems to be quite a good... We use a lot of plastic milk bottles, so we've swapped now to glass bottles. And, we use beeswax wraps at home, but I have to tell you, they feel pretty disgusting after after you've been using them for a few months. So, everything has a cost, right? But one of the costs I don't think is a fair cost is shaming, and I'm big on that. It's not my place to tell that person in the checkout counter what to do with their lives.
What about you, Rodney?
I'd gladly give up my straws, my plastic straws, if I could have my plastic bags back, please, at the supermarket. I'm desperately short of plastic bags at home for my baking. And I'm reusing my little 2 remaining plastic bags over and over and over again. And all I need is another 2 plastic bags. I can't remember the last time I would have used a straw, but I'd give my straws up. I just need a couple of plastic bags.
Well, of course, the straw has been a bit of a long-running thing in the ACT circles because a successor ACT leader, Jamie White, famously wrote an article in the Telegraph, said, "Why does your desire for a cleaner ocean trump the pleasure I get from drinking through a plastic straw?"
And what was the answer?
There's a false equivalency there.
I don't know.
I'd be interested.
What he was saying is that what gives you the why should you tell me what to do with my life? That's what he's saying, isn't he?
Well, it's an interesting thing because don't you have to question how the straw got up the turtle's nose?
Yeah, I mean, that's...
Like, it's not obvious that,
What do you mean?
Well, it's not obvious that I have a plastic straw and it ends up in a turtle. How does it get to the turtle?
Because the straw gets to the drain, Rodney Hyde, and then it goes out to the sea, and the sea is apparently swimming in plastic, the sort of plastic that you like to use, your plastic bags. And now there's more plastic in the sea than fish. It's an issue, Rodney.
You didn't let me answer. No, my straw goes in the landfill here at the Cables Valley, and it's amazing. Nothing escapes out of there, not even off the trucks. So how does it get to the turtle? If I used a straw. I mean, we jump to this. We jump to these things, don't we? And I mean, if you look at the plastic, it's other countries that aren't as prosperous as we are and can't afford the sewage treatment systems and the rubbish disposal systems that we get to enjoy here because we're prosperous.
There's a whole series of decisions that lead up to that moment that actually we can intervene in some way.
How did the straw get in the turtle's nose? I'll be thinking to myself about that all night. Marmari Stevens and Rodney Hyde, wonderful to have you both on the panel. Thank you very much for being with me today. I'm Wallace Chapman, and back with you at 3:45 tomorrow. See you then.
Whakarongo mai koe ki te reo irirangi o Aotearoa. This is Checkpoint on RNZ National. I'm Lisa Owen. E Haere nei, we speak exclusively to the stepfather of a teenager whose body lay undiscovered for weeks at student accommodation in Christchurch. Who found 19-year-old Mason Pendris?
I texted a friend of his who was in Auckland, who contacted a friend that was in the same halls. This young man decided something wasn't quite right, and ended up, to the best of my knowledge, he climbed up over the roof and round and realised something was wrong and ended up contacting security.
And was Mason's family sent an overdue accommodation bill when the teenager was apparently already dead, unnoticed in his room? Don't forget, you can watch us live on Facebook. RNZ News at 5. Kia ora, ko Susana Leata tēnei. Motorists will need to make up the shortfall to fix a decade of road safety underfunding. Reviews of the Transport Agency and Transport Ministry released today detail years of failings and recommend more spending and more powers for road safety enforcement. The document says there is no mechanism at the moment for charging road users to cover regulation costs. But the Transport Minister, Phil Typhoon, intends to set that right over the coming months.
We are going to commence a funding review of the Transport Agency, so a full policy process to consider exactly the capability that's needed, how much extra it's going to cost and how that will be funded.
Phil Twyford says the options to charge motorists will be laid out by early next year, followed by a law change. The Transport Agency already faces a bill of about $20 million to redo warrant of fitness checks on thousands of vehicles. The stepfather of a Canterbury University student whose body lay undiscovered at a hall of residence says he emailed the university asking about his son 5 weeks before his body was found. Mason Pendrose, a 19-year-old first-year student, was discovered dead in his room at Sonoda Village on September the 23rd. Anthony Holland says he last spoke to his son on Friday, July the 19th, and he was in good spirits. He couldn't get hold of him in following weeks, but only got concerned when Mason's mobile phone appeared to have been disconnected. Mr. Holland says he emailed the university about August the 19th. He says neither Canterbury University nor Campus Living Villages have been able to tell him when they last saw Mason. You can hear the full interview with Anthony Holland on Checkpoint shortly. The Immigration Minister says a report into the Carol Schrubeck decision shows he acted appropriately within a flawed system. Ian Lees-Galloway granted the Czech drug smuggler residency last year, but reversed that when new information came to light. A review out today recommends future decisions should only go to the Minister as a last resort, and in those circumstances the Minister should expect free and frank advice. National says the review shows the Minister made the wrong call and isn't up to the job. But Mr Lees-Galloway says it's clear the system was the problem.
National should have taken more seriously the report that was provided to them in 2014. They had the opportunity to improve the system, to make it more robust. They chose not to do that. I will not be ignoring the advice that I've received from Mr Heron.
Ian Lees-Galloway refused to say whether in hindsight he should have read the full file and sought advice from officials, but says he has changed his decision-making process. Residents in the Auckland suburb of Avondale say they are incredibly disturbed by the death of an elderly woman after a suspected burglary. Police were called to the home in St George's Road shortly before 4 o'clock yesterday afternoon. One resident, Annabelle Salemomo, says the community has been rocked.
People are pretty worried, just coming through, checking on the neighbours and stuff, seeing if everyone's alright. Nothing happens here other than the odd sound of cars racing and that, but other than that, no, we're pretty quiet.
Annabelle Salemomo in Avondale. The majority of Wellington Regional Council candidates support a plan to establish a blue belt around the region's coast. Such a plan would give the council greater control over the management of coastal waters. RNZ spoke to 18 candidates running for the Greater Wellington Regional Council, and 12 say they support the plan. The others cited increased rates, other priorities and concerns for the fishing industry as reasons for caution. Thomas Nash, the candidate who raised the idea, says the Regional Council needs to do more to protect the marine environment. Hamilton is on track to be the only major city to have an increase in voting for the local body election. With 2.5 days to go, 25% of eligible voters in Hamilton have voted, up from 20% at the same time in 2016. Andrew McRae reports.
While total vote returns are slightly higher in Dunedin and Christchurch, the percentage turnout in those two cities is down on 3 years ago. In Auckland, only 22.6% of votes are in, and Wellington just 15%. Hamilton City Council's Chief Executive Richard Briggs says while having just a quarter of votes returned is nothing to celebrate, Hamilton is bucking the national trend. He hopes the city may have halted a decline, which saw only 1 in 3 people voting last time. In 2016, Hamilton had the lowest turnout of all metropolitan centres. I kirikiriroa ko Andrew McRae tēnei.
The police are praising a 10-year-old boy who stopped the car his grandmother was driving after she began to lose consciousness. They say Ryan and his nana Kathy were heading north on State Highway 1 between Mere and Mercer yesterday morning. Kathy started slipping into a semi-conscious state just before 10:30 while she was behind the wheel. Ryan, who was in the front passenger seat, managed to slow the car down to a walking pace before jumping clear of the vehicle. A passing truck driver stopped and helped Ryan bring the car to a standstill. The police say Kathy is recovering well and they want to get in touch with the truck driver to thank him. The University of Otago says a community clean-up of North Dunedin will help to honour the memory of Sophia Crestani. The 19-year-old student died as hundreds of people tried to flee a party on Dundas Street on Saturday night. The university and its Students' Association have organised the clean-up on Sunday afternoon at the request of Sophia's parents. The university's Deputy Vice-Chancellor, Helen Nicholson, says she hopes it will help students and staff as they grieve.
First of all, we're having the street clean up because it was the family's request as a good way to honour the memory of Sophia. But obviously the death has affected many people, and as a close community we would see it as a practical way of helping our students and staff as they work through their grief and sadness.
Helen Nicholson, Otago University's Deputy Vice-Chancellor. The clean-up will be between midday and 4 p.m. on Sunday. The starting location is yet to be decided. It's 5:05. The Silver Ferns might be world champions, but the assistant coach, Yvonne Willering, says they still have some way to go to regain the level of public support they previously had. New Zealand play their first match since their World Cup win in Liverpool when they host Australia in the opening Constellation Cup test in Christchurch on Sunday. The Silver Ferns struggled in the 2 years leading up to the Cup, failing to win a medal at the Gold Coast Commonwealth Games and slipping down the world rankings. Willering says there's still ground to make up.
Now it's a chance, an opportunity to build our sport a little bit more so and bring the public back courtside, because I think we've lost some of our audience, and this is an opportunity to bring them back.
Yvonne Willering. Fiji face the prospect of playing their final match at the Rugby World Cup tonight when they play Wales. A win would guarantee qualification for the 2023 tournament and keep alive their faint hopes of advancing to the quarterfinals this year. Fiji's only win so far in Japan was against Georgia, while the only time they have beaten Wales was at the 2007 tournament. Fiji's coach, John McKee, says, or has been emphasising their need for discipline.
We know what a good defensive side Wales are, and we're going to have to work really hard to build the pressure to create any opportunities for us to score tries.
John McKee. Heavyweight boxer Derek Chisora has taken a verbal swing at Joseph Parker after the New Zealander pulled out of this month's bout in London. Parker withdrew after he became ill from a spider bite. Chisora says Parker seems to think he is Peter Parker, not Joseph Parker, with his Spider-Man excuses. That's the news.
A fatal ferry voyage.
Pretty much as soon as it left the lagoon into the open seas, the ship started to creak, but the captain kept going.
Battling bushfires.
It's still extremely dry throughout much of southern Queensland, and we expect the fires that are going to continue to give us trouble from time to time.
A typhoon heading for the Rugby World Cup.
That would have a far greater effect and would probably, I would guess, result in cancellation of matches that day.
All the Elements morning report weekdays from 6 a.m. on 101 FM, on air and online. Then on 9 to noon, Xero's head of AI says New Zealand has 2 years to take full advantage of artificial intelligence technology before we'll become followers, not leaders. And after 10, award-winning novelist Holden Shepherd on growing up gay in small-town Western Australia. Join me, Catherine Ryan, on 9 to noon after morning report on RNZ National.
Now the short forecast from Met Service to midnight tomorrow. Northland through to Taranaki, including Coromandel, Bay of Plenty, Taumaranui and Taupo. Mainly fine, but low cloud and drizzle in Northland from this afternoon and elsewhere overnight. Drizzle turning to occasional rain tomorrow. Whanganui and Taihape to Wellington, including Wairarapa. Cloud clearing to fine weather this evening. Cloud and drizzle developing in the west overnight, turning to rain everywhere tomorrow. Gisborne and Hawke's Bay, fine but some cloud. Nelson, cloudy periods, drizzle developing tonight, turning to rain tomorrow. For Marlborough and Canterbury, fine with high cloud, low cloud and scattered rain south of Christchurch from later tonight. A few spots of rain elsewhere tomorrow evening. For Bulla, Westland and Fiordland, rain with heavy falls, easing north of Hokitika for a time this afternoon and evening. Otago and Southland, periods of rain. Chatham Islands becoming fine tonight, then low cloud developing tomorrow evening. RNZ National, it's 10 minutes past 5.
Thanks, Susanna. And you're with Checkpoint. I'm Lisa Owen. The stepfather of a Canterbury University student who was dead for weeks before he was found in his halls of residence says the accommodation provider sent him an overdue bill while his son's body likely lay undiscovered in his room. 19-year-old Mason Pendris, who was in his first year studying e-commerce, was found dead on September 23rd. Anthony Holland raised Mason from age 4 with his mother, who died of breast cancer in 2014. Mason called Anthony Dad. Supported by his partner, Teresa, Anthony Holland sat down in the studio with me today, and I started by asking if he could tell us a little bit about Mason.
So Mason was doing an e-commerce degree, and to this day he couldn't explain to me what e-commerce was, and I tried to Google it and I don't know either, so I don't know what he was studying other than e-commerce.
Yeah, and so what about personality-wise? Can you tell us a little about him?
Yeah, there have been a few moments where people have suggested he's a wallflower, but that wasn't his personality. He was gregarious. He was just a fun-loving young man, loved his rowing, loved a lot of things about his world, and was excited about, as he called it, his adventure.
University was the adventure, wasn't it?
University was the adventure, yep, absolutely.
So when was the last time you spoke to him?
I think the date was the 19th of July. It was a Friday night. He rang me at 11 o'clock at night. I'd just gone to bed, and he was a very happy young man at that point at 11 o'clock on a Friday night, as you can imagine some university students can be.
And so that was the last chat. I imagine you've gone back and pored over this kind of stuff, haven't you?
Absolutely.
Yeah. So what was the first sign that something was not right?
I cancelled his fuel card, and I didn't get a phone call from him to say my card's bounced because I hadn't heard from him. I just thought that was a way of getting him to call me, to be honest, because every time I spoke to him, he was too busy, he was out with friends. I get down to Christchurch quite a bit with work, and I suggested we met for dinner and stuff, but he didn't want to. He was too busy doing stuff out with his mates. And to my knowledge, there was no reason not to doubt that. He was just having a good time at university.
He was being an independent young man who'd just moved away from home.
Yeah, now he was also a boarder at Scots College, so his Monday to Fridays included rowing. So he was just enjoying the experience, in my opinion, and every time I spoke to him, there was noise in the background, there was people, and on the occasion, I'm sure he was a little bit drunk as well and tried to pretend he wasn't, but that's all right, he's 19, why wouldn't you be?
So you cancelled the fuel card about when, do you reckon?
I can't remember. Really, it was just a phone call just to get him to the people to get him to call me, if that makes sense. Just because I've been chasing him, we emailed and we tried to catch him and text him, and it was only really when his phone went from answer phone and calling to number not available, and then suddenly it raised a little bit of suspicion in my mind, and I did email the relevant people at the university.
So who were they? Just generally?
It was from their website. It was a contact us email. Now, where I work, we have quite a strong firewall for emails and stuff. So sometimes stuff doesn't always go through, and sometimes it does. But I reckon on about the 19th, I sent him a text saying, if you don't call me, I'll call the university. And it was pretty much that day that I sent a message.
The 19th of what month was it?
July.
Right.
Yes.
So you sent a text to Mason saying, if you don't call me, I'm getting...
August, yes, sorry, August, my bad.
So when did you send the text?
19th of August.
What, no email?
The email to the university was the same day.
But he'd been sending texts and emails to Masons.
I've got pages and pages of stuff.
So you were texting him but not getting any response, and you just thought he was going about his business.
Student life. That's what I thought. His adventure.
And when you made contact with authorities as such, was it the university or was it the Hall of Residence?
Neither of them. So I didn't even realise until last week or the week before that campus living villages were responsible for the accommodation, because when I went onto the website to look for accommodation, I went through the university portal and I wasn't even aware it was a separate entity. I thought it was one and the same, sitting under the same umbrella almost. And I wasn't even aware that CLV were outsourced by the university.
Yeah, so who did you think ran the Hall of Residence?
I thought it was the university, because I went through their portal to look for accommodation. I guess that the contract I should have read a little bit better, that said CLV were responsible for running the accommodation.
So when you were paying for the accommodation, you thought you were paying the university for the accommodation?
But I was paying CLV.
Okay. So when you were trying to contact Mason, you're sending texts. Was it unusual for him not to get back to you immediately?
Yeah. He was just a boy doing his thing. There was quite often, it would be a week or so before I heard from him. When he was away at boarding, he'd drive off on the Sunday night to go to school, and I wouldn't see him till the Friday or hear from him even. You know, it wasn't uncommon. He was an independent young man who was living his life. It was his adventure, right? So I didn't, in hindsight, which is 20/20 vision, right? In hindsight, it wasn't probably the best thing, but
he didn't want you to.
He didn't want me to. That's correct.
Did you know many of his friends? Did you?
Yeah.
Did you try and text or talk
Absolutely.
to them?
So finally I got hold. I got a little bit nervous when this was the second or third time that the phone, young boys, they buy a new phone, they get a new number, they don't always keep the same number. And I thought that he'd just got a new phone like he'd done in the past and didn't ask me for money, so that was a good thing. And I managed to get hold of a friend of his, Raymond, who was in Auckland, and he managed to find a boy down in Christchurch who ended up climbing over the roof to realise something wasn't quite right. And at that point...
Sorry, Anthony, explain that to me. So a friend went, someone went physically looking for him?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
And how so?
So what happened was I texted a friend of his who was in Auckland, who contacted a friend that was in the same halls. No names, no pack drill. This young man decided something wasn't quite right, and ended up, to the best of my knowledge, he climbed up over the roof and round and realised something was wrong, and ended up contacting security, who entered the room.
So this student climbed up onto the building to look into Mason's...
That's our understanding, absolutely.
Room.
We spoke to this young man, and that's our understanding.
And so are you any clearer about what happened to Mason?
No. So initial pathology is, the report is undeterminable at the moment. They've still got skin and hair, and they're still going to carry out their stuff.
So do you know who was the last person to speak to him and when he was last seen or spoken to?
Absolutely don't know at this stage. The police are still carrying out their investigations. We're being contacted on a daily basis by the police. We haven't spoken to Campus Living Villages since they did their press release. We've not heard anything from them.
No contact from them at all?
Not from CLV at all since they did their press release, and they suggested if something needed to change, they would change it.
Anthony, just to be clear, so had they spoken to you at the time they gave the press conference, spoken to you directly?
Just before they did their press conference, and I've had no contact from them since.
And what was the conversation that you had with them? What did they say to you at that time?
Condolences, sadness, they would investigate. Yeah, there was a suggestion that there'd been 12 deaths in their 13 months of running this worldwide organisation that they have, that they absolutely told me had 12 deaths in 13 months. Was that right?
Around all of
their
student
villages, and they're a worldwide. They're a global organisation. They're in the UK and Australia, and they're all over and even in the US. I'm led to believe now 12 deaths probably isn't a lot, but that strikes me somewhat that there's a little bit of irony in this pastoral care that they sold to me. That if Mason went missing, nobody checked up on him. They sold me the pastoral care that they would keep an eye on him as a young man in a new town doing stuff. And I feel, I guess not hearing from them, a little frustrated that
take your time.
I'm not going to cry. So I just feel a bit frustrated that nobody, either at the university or at CLV, chose after 4 or 5 weeks to chase him up, to find out why he'd not been to lectures, to find out why he'd not eaten. They swipe in for food. He didn't swipe in. So at some point, an alarm bell must rise and say, hang on, he's not eaten here for 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 4 weeks, whatever it is.
How long do you understand that it had been since he had swiped in for food?
We don't know. That information has left CLV and has gone to the police. We still don't have a final date. We don't have a final date at this stage.
But is it your understanding that Mason was undiscovered for a number of weeks?
Yeah, initially it was 9 weeks, then it became 8 weeks, now suddenly it's 4 weeks. So the drama of the story really will only be untold, or only be told when the police release their final status, final data. We can only rely on evidence, not hysteria, right? Oh, hysteria is not the right word. I'm sorry.
I understand.
Yeah.
You're waiting for the facts.
Yeah, I'm an engineer, so I wait for facts. I build my stuff around facts. And at this stage, we don't know. We genuinely don't know.
But what you do know is there was a period of time that he was not attending lectures. He wasn't swiping in to collect his meals.
And his accommodation.
Yeah, that's true.
And do you know what, if anything, was done by the university or the Hall of Residence during that time he was absent from some very obvious parts of his life?
The suggestion was he didn't pick up a swipe card in May. There's a suggestion. At that point, they found he was, it was, again, this is an allegation, but it's a story that in May they didn't have his swipe card. They found him eventually. He was difficult to get hold of, but at no point did either the university or CLV ring me and say, there's a red flag here. We can't get hold of him. Something's not quite right. Where is he? Have you heard from him? And I didn't know he wasn't going to lectures. And the boy was an awesome boy. He was a really, really cool kid. And I'm pretty comfortable that it wasn't 9 weeks, and I'm pretty comfortable it wasn't 8. He was a good boy. He was straight up. He told me he was working. He had a casual job. He was studying hard. He was finding the hostel food was okay.
What was he doing for a job?
He worked at Pack and Save in Wellington, and I'm assuming that he worked at Pack and Save down there, just casual, yeah. I'm assuming. He was just a teenager spreading his wings. He was just doing his thing.
So what have the university told you about his absences from lectures? Have they been able to pinpoint anything?
Nothing. There is currently an investigation, an independent investigation with Kit Toogood, QC. He's doing an independent investigation, which I do want to put on record that I find that the terms of reference of the investigation kind of point more towards Mason than the university. It's more about why Mason wasn't there, how Mason wasn't doing it. It's not looking at the university shortfall, in my opinion. I did hit them up with a terms of reference that I thought was a little bit more reasonable.
So specifically, what would you like them to look at?
I'd like to know why I didn't hear, or a parent doesn't hear for a period of time that somebody is not going to their lectures. I need to know that this isn't going to happen to another dad, that you're not going to be sat here with another parent having the same situation.
So on that note,
yes,
the accommodation, the residents, Sonoda, were the bills still being paid while Mason was not accounted for?
Yeah, absolutely. They still chased me for bills. And possibly, at this moment in time, he could have actually been dead when they chased for an account to be paid.
So would the accounts normally come to you, Anthony?
Well, it was a bit of an ironic thing, because it as to a spread a wing situation as a parent. The bills went to Mason, he passed them to me, and I got them paid. Right, I paid them. So it was more about his maturity, I guess, just giving him a little bit of responsibility, that when the bills came through, he got them, he passed them to me. He didn't have to pay them per se, but he sent them to me. But obviously they sent the bill to Mason, he didn't pass it on. They then chased me looking for payment of a bill which was outstanding. At that point, he was more than likely already deceased.
So they were chasing you over an overdue account?
I still have the email, yes.
But apparently hadn't gone and checked with the resident, Mason, as to why the bill might not have been paid.
That's my understanding, and I'll stand by that, absolutely.
What do you make of that?
I can't swear on radio, can I? That sucks. That sucks. It's appalling. It's a good word. It's appalling. Would you pay for a car service if they've not serviced your car? I know that sounds a little bit left of field, but it's the best analogy I can think of at the moment. They had a duty of care. They had a pastoral thing all over their website, which I can't access now. Their website is very different now than it was when Mason and I chose a place to stay.
So part of the reason you chose this particular hall was because you thought they were going to keep an eye on your boy?
Absolutely. Absolutely. He was 19. Now, I was very different at 19 than Mason was at 19, and I'm sure everybody's very different these days. I expected pastoral. I expected someone to check up on him, and if he wasn't going to lectures, I expected to hear about that. When he wasn't eating, I expected to hear that. They have a swipe card in their refectory, so when he eats, he swipes in and out. I was informed that it's more of a trust thing, so people come and go all the time. So why would we have a swipe card to swipe in for food if it's just a trust thing?
So do you feel let down in the sense you looked at something that was advertised, you thought you were paying for a particular service, and did you get it?
I don't believe that I got what I was sold. Or Mason, actually, I don't believe Mason got what he bought into and what he sold to him, and I guess what he thought was coming his way. I don't believe in my heart of hearts that was an honest call from them.
John Schroeder, the boss of Campus Living, has said that priority is always given to the welfare of students, but he also says that the accommodation is designed for maximum independence and it doesn't involve automatic interactions and checks. What would you say to that?
I would suggest that there's a small shortfall there, that when people don't swipe in and don't swipe out for a week or a few days, there's a flag. I understand that there's an independence thing. I do get that for a 19-year-old. No question about that. But the shortfall between Sylvie and the university, him not being around and not being seen, I believe that the left hand and the right hand weren't actually either talking or they just... Oh, that's right, they did talk because they sent me the bill.
The flatmates, have you had an opportunity to speak to them?
Yeah, we met some friends on...
You met one of them?
One of them. we met one of them. Good guy. Lots of Scots boys that are in that uni.
He was just a lovely boy.
He was just, he was a nice boy, and he was a little bit upset in his whole world as well. So I get that.
So those apartments, just so we can understand it, is it close living? I mean, would people in that apartment know if people were coming and going?
I guess I could answer that with a question. If you're in a hotel room and you're there for a month, you don't necessarily see everybody next door, right? Every day, because you all leave and arrive at different times. So, is it close? The two doors were 2 feet away from each other. And would it be common? I don't know. I can't answer that question, but I can only kind of assume. Assumption's a very dangerous word, right? I can only assume that they hadn't seen him, weren't coming and going at the same time. Might have been in the same lectures. I don't know, but
it was more like hotel living rather than what people regard as communal apartment living, where you would all meet for a meal or be sitting in the lounge watching the TV together of an evening.
I believe that's probably the case. That's my gut feeling is a lot of the boys are gamers. They'll sit and play their own. They won't go down to the communal area. There is a communal area there, isn't there, which you can meet up.
It didn't look like it'd been used.
Didn't look like it'd been used at all.
I just want to go back to something that you said when John Schroeder talked to you about the number of deaths in campus living residents. What did he say about that?
So he informed me that he had been in charge for 13 months. About 13 months, I think he said. He'd been in rest homes, but there'd been 12 passing aways in that 13 months. Worldwide, globally, obviously not New Zealand. And he did mention that he'd been in rest homes before, but
Did he think that death rate was unusual? Did he make any comment about that?
No.
It was better than rest homes.
That's what he said to you?
That's what I suggested, and he just laughed and smiled and nodded his head. It was better than rest homes.
So the university has launched this inquiry, and Kit Toogood, a former High Court judge, is leading it. Have you had the opportunity to speak to him directly?
So I have met Kit. We met him last week. He gave us an outline of the terms of reference that they suggested, which we weren't particularly happy with, and we did try to change it.
Have they agreed to change anything?
A few things, but not really to everything. There is a focus that they're pointing more towards Mason than they're pointing towards the shortfall, in my opinion, within the university. So the university have sanctioned this investigation, not Campus Living. My knowledge is it's purely University of Canterbury, and it appears that they are their focus of the terms of reference, personally and through some advice I've received, they kind of point it more towards Mason rather than
what he did, rather than what they may have done or not done.
Yes, absolutely.
So what do you want to come out of it?
I don't want another parent sat here in front of you talking about this feeling the way I do. I don't ever want this to happen to another young person. Unfortunately, right, death's part of life. I'm not saying this would have changed anything in the outcome. I'm not saying it would have changed, but the period of time and the lack of... Sorry. So the cause of death might never be known. We'll never know. If we'd have checked on him earlier, would we have saved it? We maybe not. But nobody needs to... I couldn't even hug my boy. I couldn't even hug him. The policeman that came to knock at my door at 2 o'clock in the morning, I said, I'm going to get Christ. He went, mm-mm. It was recommended to us not even to bring his body back to Wellington. We had to cremate him in Christchurch and do a roadie back, me and him. Oh, man, this sucks. This is wrong. Sorry.
And you don't want anyone else
No other parent should be sat doing this.
Do you have confidence that the university investigation will achieve anything?
Hope's a great thing, right? I hope so. I hope so. I hope they learn, CLV learn, I learn, parents learn. Kids generally learn that they keep an eye on each other as well. So,
I have to ask you, Mason, was he, to the best of your knowledge, happy and healthy? Had he had any issues with mental health?
no, absolutely none. Now, we lost his mum 5 years ago to breast cancer. At that point, he and I just bonded. We bonded before, but we were close, we were tight. We talked about all sorts, man. He was 6'4", he was huge, built like a brick outhouse. Can I say that?
You can.
He was built like a brick outhouse. He was huge. He was strong. He had a great smile. He had munchkin cheeks when he laughed. He was just a really good all-round boy. Mental health, absolutely nothing in my heart suggests for 1 second there were mental health issues at all.
So what would you say to parents, because it's about this time of the year that they're sorting their university, they're choosing where they're going to stay, they're heading off, about to head off, full of excitement to start life at uni.
On their adventure?
Yeah, what would you say to parents and those kids?
Keep in touch with each other regularly. And if you've got any doubts at all about the right place, just check it out. Just be careful. Just seriously think about where they're going. I even suggested to Mason not to go, to stay at home, to go to Massey at Wellington, and he was even offered a job at full-time at Pack and Save, and he was going to do a year out. Or I suggested he did a year out, but no, this was his adventure. And that's what he wanted to do, so who am I to stop that young man?
I know hindsight's a great and wonderful thing.
Hindsight's 20/20 vision, right?
Yeah. Would you have done things differently?
Of course I would. So the day we were going down to Christchurch, we were doing a roadie in the car. He packed his bags. He was on the 3 o'clock ferry in the morning. He came to see me at about 2 o'clock, I was staying awake. And he asked me if he could go on his own because it was an adventure. And I said, well, I don't want you to, but if you... And he said, it's what I want to do, Dad. And I went, cool. All right, it's what you want. On the hour, every hour, you ring me. Every hour on the hour. So at 3:30 in the morning, at 4:30 in the morning, at 5:30 in the morning, he just kept ringing me to telling me he was doing all right. And when I went to give him a hug at the front door, he was a big lad, I had to stand on the step to hug him because he was huge. Couldn't find the dog. They actually had the dog on the front seat of the car because he was taking the dog. He was taking the dog to uni with him because... Hey, no one didn't know, he's only little. And him and his dog were real close mates. And we had a pretend fight at 3 o'clock in the morning, or 2 o'clock in the morning about the dog and who was keeping him. And he just has such a good heart, and I'll always be in his shadow.
Is that the last time you saw him, when you stood on the step and gave him a hug?
Yeah, it was. It was. The big sod tried to steal the dog.
And that was Anthony Holland, who is the stepfather of Mason Pendris, and he was supported during that interview by his partner, Teresa. Checkpoint understands early pathology and toxicology reports find no presence of drugs or evidence of self-harm. Sonoda, run by Campus Living Villages, is not offering accommodation for first-year students next year, a joint decision made with Canterbury University. Both Campus Living Villages and Canterbury University have declined Checkpoint's requests for an interview. Tertiary Education Minister Chris Hipkins has provided Checkpoint with the following statement. My deepest sympathies are with Mason's family and friends during this difficult time. I'm looking at the regulatory rules and requirements around student accommodation as a result of this tragedy and intend to progress the issue as a matter of the highest priority. And it is time now, a little late, we'll go to the headlines with Susanna.
RNZ News at 5:30. The stepfather of a student whose body lay undiscovered for weeks at a hostel on the Canterbury University campus says he emailed the university asking about his son 5 weeks before his body was found. Mason Pendrose was discovered in his room at Sonoda Village on September the 23rd. Anthony Holland says he last spoke to his son on July the 19th and emailed the university a month later. He says eventually one of Mason's friends climbed onto the roof of the building to look into his window, and that is how his body was discovered. The Immigration Minister says a report into his decision to grant Carol Schrubeck residency shows he acted appropriately within a flawed system. Ian Lees-Galloway changed his mind about granting the Czech drug smuggler residency when new information came to light. Today's review recommends that decisions go to the Minister only as a last resort. National says the review shows the Minister made the wrong call and isn't up to the job. Motorists will have to help fund the Transport Agency to make up for years of road safety underfunding. The government has today released reviews of the agency and the Transport Ministry, which spell out a decade of failings. The reviews recommend more spending and more powers for road safety enforcement. The Minister, Phil Twyford, says options for charging motorists will be laid out by early next year. Most candidates for Wellington Regional Council support a plan for a blue belt around the region's coast to give it greater control over coastal waters. RNZ spoke to 18 candidates running for the Greater Wellington Regional Council, and 12 say they support the plan. The others say increased rates and concerns for the fishing industry are reasons for caution. A Wellington group investigating hikes in the cost of disaster insurance says the government needs to triple the Earthquake Commission's cap on payouts. The task force is chaired by the city's mayor and includes scientists, engineers, developers, body corporates and the Insurance Council. The EQC currently caps payouts at $150,000, but the group wants it boosted to $400,000. Those are the latest news headlines from RNZ National. Our next news and weather is at 6.
Thanks, Susanna. If you're just tuning in, you're listening to Checkpoint. I'm Lisa Owen, and it's time for business now with Nona Peltier. Nona, so we've got another economic indicator pointing to more downside. What is it this time?
Yeah, it's the trichometer. This is a forward-looking economic indicator ANZ puts out monthly, and what it shows is that there was a slowdown in both light traffic and in heavy traffic. Not that it's a contraction, so we're still expecting some economic growth. But the indicators aren't very good. So on one hand, ANZ is still picking the economy, GDP, to bottom out around 2%. But the light traffic index indicates more like about 1%. And there are other indicators pointing to even slower economic growth. However, the ANZ chief economist who constructed the trichometer says that it could be just a matter of less population. So we've had less population growth, so the fewer people coming to New Zealand means that maybe we have lighter traffic on the road.
Interesting. And what else has been going on around the markets today? Not
very good news there, I'm afraid. No, I don't have a lot of good stuff today. The International Monetary Fund, the new head, has come out with a forecast for slow economic growth. In fact, a bit of a contraction. She reckons that the US-China trade war is costing the global economy $70 billion. And that equates to a 0.8% fall in global GDP. Those aren't good numbers, and they certainly were reflected in the markets today.
Forget the truckometer. We need a Trumpometer.
We have one, but we're not keeping track today, except that the tensions have certainly escalated again. But that doesn't mean much, because we know that it can turn again. So they're going to start talking, the Chinese and U.S. trade negotiators, later this week. Who knows? Things could definitely turn around.
So what numbers do you bring
us? Okay, so our local market fell 0.2%. That was 75 points down. That's the NZX Top 50 Index to 10,941. And I have to say, that's still pretty high. The Kiwi's trading steady at 63.1 US cents, 93.6 Australian, and ticked up a little bit against the British pence at 51.7.
Thanks, Nona. Nona Peltier with our business news. Road users are set to foot the bill for improved safety inspections after years of patchy oversight and dodgy warrant of fitnesses. The government says the failings, detailed in 2 reviews released today, contributed to the rising road toll, and it wants to set things right. Charlotte Cook reports.
Transport Minister Phil Twyford laid the blame for a rise in deaths on the road squarely at the feet of the previous National-led government.
We're cleaning up a mess here that was left by the former National government. The report clearly documents massive regulatory failure for the 9 years that National was in office. The report clearly states that the priorities and incentives were wrong, that the Transport Agency was encouraged to focus on building roads at the expense of its regulatory mandate.
National's transport spokesperson Chris Bishop rejects that.
Well, I think it's disappointing that Minister Twyford's essentially using what's a very serious issue to make a series of political attacks on the National Party. That's not what the report says. The report makes it clear no one single person is to blame, no one single event is to blame. There was an accumulation of problems.
The final report reviewing the Ministry of Transport's oversights of the NZTA does not blame anyone for a rising road toll. But the CEO of the ministry, Peter Mercy, today said the report was a wake-up call and the ministry must share responsibility for regulatory failure. As a short-term shot in the arm, the NZTA will get $45 million for operations and safety inspections on vehicles caught up in warrant of fitness failings. But long-term, the papers released today say there is no mechanism for funding NZTA's regulatory work. Mr Twyford says early next year, Cabinet will look at bringing in a system, recognising that better enforcement benefits all road users.
We are going to commence a funding review of the Transport Agency, so a full policy process to consider exactly the capability that's needed, how much extra it's going to cost and how that will be funded.
The Chief Executive of the Road Transport Forum, Nick Leggett, says everyone behind the wheel could be forced to pay up under that new system.
We have some concern because it sounds as though the government are looking to add costs to all motorists and transport operators. We really need to see more detail about that and also understand the definition of what the problem is.
Mr Leggett says truckers can't afford new levies and do not want to see a swing from under-regulation to expensive over-regulation.
Another added cost, and it's not just the financial cost of more regulation, it's the time taken and having to jump through red tape and hoops that will actually slow down productivity.
A Cabinet paper also says NZTA will demand that garages and certifiers have higher insurance cover. A truck certifier, who RNZ agreed not to name, says his guess is his insurance premiums will double or triple and he will have to pass that cost on to customers. The head of the Motor Trade Association, Craig Pomari, says many garages have ignored his recommendations to have $1 million liability cover. He says the NZTA insurance rules are too vague and need tightening, even if it costs businesses more.
The regulation is too woolly. Whatever is required to cover the expected risk, well, who knows what that is.
The NZTA has also confirmed that next month it'll stop giving out free warrant of fitness vouchers, and customers with dodgy WAFs will have to go back to their garages to seek costs. Chris Bishop says National would scrap any government policy that lumps more levies on drivers. For Checkpoint, Charlotte Cook.
A review of how the Immigration Minister came to approve residency for a convicted drug smuggler has concluded it's too high risk for ministers to be making decisions about deportations. The report by QC Mike Heron also reveals sufficiently powerful grounds were presented to the Minister for convicted drug smuggler Carol Schrubeck to be deported, and it was unexpected when he chose to grant residency. Ian Lees-Galloway's bungled handling of the Schrubeck case led to calls for his scalp. And Mike Heron says giving the power back to officials is a way to keep the minister above the fray. Our political reporter Joe Moyer has been following today's developments.
Carol Schrubeck is in jail for importing almost 5 kilograms of ecstasy and faces deportation on his release. He is appealing his deportation after Ian Lees-Galloway reversed his earlier decision to grant him residence. Today, a report commissioned by the Chief Executive of the Ministry of Business, Innovation and Employment concluded a more sensible system would be to leave the responsibility for complicated deportation cases with delegated decision makers at Immigration NZ. The head of Immigration NZ, Greg Patchell, says his staff have the expertise.
The point that Mike makes in his report is those individuals do this stuff not so much day in, day out, but on a regular basis and are well tuned with the system. But again, as Mike points out, the nature of absolute discretion is it's really up to the individual faced with the information to weigh and balance the things that they want to weigh and balance. You could argue a person who does it more regularly has more ability to do that, perhaps in a more instinctive way. However, it's at the end of the day, the law gives them protection around that absolute discretion.
A recommendation in 2015 to make changes to the power of absolute discretion were not adopted by then Immigration Minister Michael Woodhouse. That's left a dictatorship-like scenario where a minister can make decisions without receiving any advice or recommendations and leaves little ability for Immigration NZ to push back on decisions. Such is the case with Shrewbeck, with ministry officials surprised by the decision to grant residency given there was sufficiently powerful grounds to deport him. Mr Lees-Galloway has been under fire for not reading the complete file and subsequently having to reverse the residency decision after the opposition began drip-feeding information to the media about Shrewbeck's checkered past. He's refused to say whether, in hindsight, he should have read the full file and sought advice from officials.
Look, I've made changes to the process that I use. I've made sure that I have time to consider the file well in advance of making a decision. I have legal representation in the room to help make those decisions. I have made changes to my decision-making process.
MB's chief executive, Carolyn Tremaine, repeatedly told media today that the decision sat with the Immigration Minister.
He has to make the decision based on the information he has, and he made the decision. It's an absolute discretion, and we don't question what he has decided.
But Nationals Justice spokesman Mark Mitchell says the findings confirm the minister stuffed up and should go.
The whole thing is grubby, and no one has ever from Labor, and certainly not the minister, has ever come forward and fully offered an explanation to the country as to why he made such a shocking decision.
The report's author, Mike Heron, says it makes sense for the minister to be the exception rather than the rule when it comes to making these decisions.
The minister's a very important, head of the department who are responsible for running the machinery of government, and to have them in this position of absolute discretion, making decisions on individual cases, well, that's what the statute says, but it's quite high risk.
Mr Heron says shifting the power back to the ministry is about protecting the minister and the department. Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern says she has confidence in Mr Lees-Galloway, and this report makes it clear that the process itself was the problem. From Parliament for Checkpoint, Joe Moyer.
It is about 9 minutes away from 6. I'm Lisa Owen and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. We'd love to hear from you about anything you've heard on the programme this evening, specifically about our interview with Anthony Holland. If you have children who are at university in the halls of residence or you're sending them there next year, let us know your thoughts. You can get in touch by text 2101, tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ or email checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. The inner workings of a Mr Big undercover police operation have been laid bare to a jury in a High Court murder trial. At the end of a 3-month undercover operation, David Little admitted to killing Brett Hall at a rural Whanganui property in May 2011. He said he shot Mr Hall between the eyes, cut his body into 2 pieces and buried him in 2 places on separate beaches near Bulls. But Mr Hall's body has never been found, and the defence says the confession was coerced. Ben Strang has been covering the case at the High Court in Wellington and joins me now. Ben, what was this operation that the police ran?
Well, Brett Hall went missing in May 2011, but David Little soon became a key suspect in this. It wasn't until 3 years later that the police's undercover crew were asked to run this undercover operation, a Mr Big operation. These operations started in Canada in the mid-90s, and New Zealand started doing them in about 2005. So essentially what they're putting together is a team of undercover police officers who have this fake criminal organisation which they get a target involved with. In this specific operation, it started when people door-knocked David Little's house, and long story short, he ended up doing a survey, winning a fishing trip, and that is where he was introduced to a person who was part of this Mr Big gang. And over the next 3 months, they slowly brought him into that group, culminating in a meeting with this Mr. Big character, the big boss of the group.
So what have we learnt about the confession? Why did he confess?
Well, throughout the operation, the main handler, called Nick O'Neill, drummed into Mr. Little that there were 3 important things being part of this group. That was honesty, trust and loyalty. He also subtly flashed some of the potential that being part of this group was. He was driven around in a Porsche Cayenne 4-wheel drive. There was a time where the first job he went on, somebody owed $15,000, and it was mentioned that the money doesn't really matter to Mr. Big. It's just a figure, but it's the honesty and the trust that is the biggest currency for him. So that was the important thing. These sorts of things were mentioned all the time throughout this operation. And by his own admission, this Mr. O'Neill said he spent about 73 hours with Mr. Little and probably mentioned honesty, trust and loyalty over 100 times. So after 3 months of this, building up to the moment when he actually met the big boss, that's when he revealed that he had killed Mr. Hall.
So what does the defence have to say about all of this?
Well, the defence is saying that this is coerced, that by flashing all of the cash, the flash cars, which was a hand-me-down, and the suggestion is if you're part of the group, you get given these cars, that he just thought he had to say the right things to get these sorts of things. He was in financial difficulties himself. And so when it came to time to offer up his explanation of what happened to Mr. Hall, he just went for it thinking that he was in this situation where he was going to end up in a better place financially. So Justice Jill Mellon, the judge in the case, was very clear before the jury heard any of this audio that she said if there was an incentive and no perceived punishment for him to confess the murder, then it's plausible that this could be a false confession, and so the jury have to consider whether that's the case.
Thanks, Ben. That's Ben Strang, who's been covering that rather interesting case, murder trial in the High Court. The boss of one of the world's biggest sports leagues, the NBA, has defended free speech in a row with China. It all began when the Houston Rockets general manager, Daryl Morey, tweeted support for the protesters in Hong Kong. He was referring to months of pro-democracy protests in the territory, which is part of China, but enjoys unique freedoms. The tweet was criticised by Chinese fans, sponsors and commercial partners, and some have suspended their cooperation with the NBA. NBA boss Adam Silver defended Mr. Morey and said the league would support freedom of expression.
We are not apologizing for Daryl exercising his freedom of expression. I regret, again, having communicated directly with many friends in China, that so many people are upset, including millions and millions of our fans. I understand that there are consequences from that exercise of in essence, his freedom of speech. And, we will have to live with those consequences.
China refused to air any of the NBA's pre-season games, which drew huge audiences in China. And here's the response from the Chinese Foreign Ministry.
China has already made solemn representations to the US side over this wrong statement. The Chinese Basketball Association and the Chinese partners of the Rockets team have both made statements. I think China's position is very clear. In addition, I suggest that you pay attention to the reaction of the ordinary Chinese people on this matter and their attitude. How can you have exchanges and cooperate with the Chinese side without understanding the Chinese people? That's not going to work.
Adam Silver later told CNN's Alex Thomas the NBA's core values come first.
It's part of the DNA of this league. We are, at the end of the day, an American-based company. Of course, we do business all around the world, but those values, those mores, travel with us.
How concerned are you that China will not accept that position?
I otherwise wouldn't be that concerned because we've been doing business in China for so long. I will say I'm a bit surprised that CCTV canceled the telecasting of preseason games and specifically named me as the cause. It's interesting, while at the same time in the U.S. media, there's some suggesting I'm not being protective enough of our employees. Clearly, they're seeing it the other way in China. But I think at the end of the day, we've been pretty consistent. And it's not our role to adjudicate these types of disputes, but certainly to provide a platform. And I'm hopeful that, as I said earlier, that by using sports, people will have the ability to talk more openly about these issues and make decisions for themselves.
That was the NBA boss, Adam Silver. Time for some of your feedback now. A lot of you have been getting in touch about the interview we did earlier in the program with Anthony Holland. He is the stepfather of the young man, Mason Pendris, whose body was found at some student accommodation in Canterbury. And he was lying undetected, undiscovered there for some weeks. A lot of you very moved by hearing Anthony speak. This person says, I want to acknowledge the tremendous courage of Anthony Holland in his interview with your program. You, sir, this person says, are a beautiful, real man. Someone else got in touch to say we had a daughter who was living at a campus living village. They're the same people who operate the facility that this young man was found in. She switched halls to warehouse this year after realising that after 4 months she had never seen her resident assistant.
RNZ News at 6. Ngā mihi nui ko Susana lei ātawa tēnei. The body of a Canterbury University student that lay undiscovered for weeks was only found when his friend climbed onto the roof at the Hall of Residence and looked into his room. Mason Pendris, a 19-year-old first-year student, was living at Sonoda, student accommodation run by Campus Living Villages. His stepfather, Anthony Holland, told Checkpoint he tried to contact Mason many times and put the lack of response down to typical teenage behaviour until his son's mobile was disconnected. Mr. Holland says he then phoned around Mason's friends.
I texted a friend of his who was in Auckland, who contacted a friend that was in the same halls. This young man decided something wasn't quite right, and ended up, to the best of my knowledge, he climbed up over the roof and round and realised something was wrong and ended up contacting security.
Anthony Holland says he also emailed Canterbury University in August about his concerns, and Campus Living Villages told Checkpoint that Sonoda is not offering accommodation for first-year students next year, a joint decision made with Canterbury University. A Wellington group investigating hikes in the cost of disaster insurance in the city says the government needs to triple the Earthquake Commission's payout cap. It's one of a number of recommendations from the mayoral task force, including scientists, engineers, developers, body corporates and the Insurance Council. The government's disaster insurer currently caps payouts at $150,000, but the group says it needs to be boosted to $400,000. The group also says there needs to be more transparency from insurers about how premiums are set and an investigation into the role of brokers in setting premium levels. Immigration officials say the decision to grant a Czech drug smuggler residency was the minister's alone. Ian Lees-Galloway granted Carol Schrubeck residency last year, but reversed that when new information came to light. A review has recommended future deportation decisions should go to the minister only as a last resort, and in those circumstances, the minister should expect free and frank advice. The review of Immigration New Zealand was requested by the Chief Executive of the Ministry of Business, Innovation and Employment, Carolyn Tremaine. She says officials don't question a minister's absolute discretion.
He has to make the decision based on the information he has, and he made the decision. It's an absolute discretion, and we don't question what he has decided.
Carolyn Tremaine, the Chief Executive of the Ministry of Business, Innovation and Employment. The Prime Minister says she would expect the new Suicide Prevention Office to tackle issues around the upward trend in the suicide rate for the Asian population. A report from the Suicide Mortality Review Committee has raised concerns that not enough is being done to prevent suicide in Asian communities. Jacinda Ardern says it is not something that has been directly raised with her, but she says it's important the new services that are being set up take this into account.
Making sure we have a workforce that can communicate well, that can reach out into those communities and have that level of engagement that perhaps our traditional and existing mental health support network may not have.
The Prime Minister, Jacinda Ardern. A jury in a murder trial at the High Court in Wellington has heard the inner workings of a Mr Big undercover police operation. At the end of the 3-month operation, David Little admitted to killing his former friend Brett Hall at a rural Whanganui property. Ben Strang has more.
David Little's handler during the Mr Big operation drove him around in a Porsche Cayenne 4-wheel drive, an apparent hand-me-down from the mock criminal syndicate. The accused was invited into a world where $15,000 owed meant nothing to the boss of the organisation. Mr Little was told that Mr Big thought honesty, truth and loyalty was a more important currency. The jury will hear between 20 and 30 hours of recordings from the operation, including Mr Little's admission of murder. The defence says the recordings will show he was coerced. Brett Hall's body has never been found. This is Ben Strang.
A proposal to establish a blue belt around the entire Greater Wellington region has been met with widespread support from council candidates. Paul Necker and Wellington constituency candidate Thomas Nash raised the idea as a way of protecting the marine environment. A blue belt was suggested in 2013 and Wellington City Council is still engaged in related activities. Many of Mr Nash's 22 fellow candidates agreed with the idea. Roger Blakely says a blue belt would have a positive impact.
Restoring the fragile ecosystems on rocky reefs. It could revive the abundance of sea life. It could bring about more visits from whales and dolphins and penguins. Lots of benefits for the marine ecology of our coastal areas.
Wellington City Councillor Roger Blakely. However, other candidates are worried about the impact of a blue belt on the fishing industry. The West Coast Civil Defence and Emergency Management teams remain on standby as heavy rain continues on the coast. More than 180 millimetres has fallen in Westland in the past 24 hours, with about 50 millimetres recorded in just 6 hours in some places up today. Emergency Management Group spokesperson Claire Brown says they're not out of the woods yet, but the forecast is looking better and there are no reports of damage. Grey District Mayor Tony Cockshawn, who is counting down to his final days in the job, says it's been a fairly typical day on the coast.
Just the nature of the West Coast. You get heavy downpours here, earthquakes and all types of cyclones and the like, but we're here to cope with these types of things and we always do and always will in the future.
Grey District Mayor Tony Cockshawn. A super typhoon is in the Western Pacific, is forecast to strike Japan in the coming days. Hagibis intensified unusually fast, going from tropical storm to super typhoon in just 18 hours. The Japan Meteorological Agency has given Hagibis its strongest violent classification and thinks it will clip southeastern Japan near Tokyo and Yokohama. It's coming up to 6:30 And Rugby World Cup officials say it would be inappropriate to reveal their contingency plans should Super Typhoon Hagibis cause disruption to the final group of pool fixtures. England play France on Saturday and Japan take on Scotland on Sunday, with both games in nearby Yokohama. Tournament rules state any pool match game not played cannot be rescheduled and is instead recorded as a 0-all draw with no bonus points available. New Zealand play Italy in Toyota City, which is a couple of 100 kilometres away from Tokyo, on Saturday afternoon, and All Blacks assistant coach Ian Foster says there's little they can do except keep an eye on the forecast.
This report seems to be a little bit more serious than some of the other reports, so we'll just track it and watch it. It doesn't change any plans for us now, but as it gets closer to the time, I think all we hope and everyone hopes is that it doesn't disrupt anything. So I guess we just sort of have to cross our fingers.
Ian Foster. A third quarter fight back has been unable to prevent the New Zealand Breakers basketballers from a 14-point loss to NBA side the Memphis Grizzlies. The Breakers trimmed Memphis's lead to just 6 before the NBA hosts regained control to seal a 108-94 win. Corey Webster impressed for the Breakers with a game-high 19 points. Racing New South Wales Chief Executive Peter V'landys wants to scrap more than 150 years of tradition and move the Melbourne Cup from the first Tuesday in November. V'landys says the race should be pushed back to later in November as part of a revamp of the racing schedule. That's the news.
Tonight on Nights, Brian Crump is back and he talks to the author of a 2-volume work which chronicles 45 years of painting by artist Colin McCann. We continue our series from the BBC World Service, The Truth About Parkinson's, and we have another gem from the archive of Ngā Taonga Sound and Vision for our midweek quiz. That's Nights with Brian Crump after the news at 7 on RNZ National.
Now the short forecast from Met Service to midnight tomorrow. Northland to Taranaki, including Coromandel, Bay of Plenty, Taumaranui and Taupo. Mainly fine, low cloud and drizzle in Northland from tonight and elsewhere overnight. Drizzle turning to occasional rain tomorrow. Whanganui and Taihape to Wellington, including Wairatapa. Cloud clearing to fine weather tonight. Cloud and drizzle developing in the west overnight, turning to rain everywhere tomorrow. Gisborne and Hawke's Bay, fine but some cloud. Nelson, cloudy periods, drizzle developing tonight, turning to rain tomorrow. Marlborough and Canterbury, fine with high cloud, then low cloud and scattered rain south of Christchurch from later this evening. A few spots of rain elsewhere tomorrow evening. Bulla, Westland and Fiordland, rain with heavy falls, easing north of Hokitika for a time this evening. Otago and Southland, periods of rain. Chatham Islands becoming fine, then low cloud developing tomorrow evening. RNZ National, it's 6:09.
Thanks, Susanna. This is Checkpoint and I'm Lisa Owen. Auckland police are investigating the death of a woman in her 80s who is suspected to have died after a burglary at her Avondale home. Police were called to the woman's home in St George's Road shortly before 4 p.m. yesterday, but her family say her body has yet to be returned to them. Katie Doyle reports.
A police cordon remains in place outside the St George's Road property, where the body of an 83-year-old woman was found yesterday afternoon. The woman is believed to have died after a burglary at her home, and at this point her death is being treated as unexplained. Her son-in-law, Mr Ram, who didn't want to give his full name, says the family are very sad and are anxious to get her body back.
The body is on the floor, you cannot see the body.
And how is the rest of the family?
Oh, they're all at Avondale station, just having interview after interview. But our main focus is to get the body out of there where she belongs.
Avondale locals say they're shocked by the woman's death. One man, Gordon Bruce, says it's normally a quiet suburb.
I saw a lot of police cars, maybe about 4 or 5 police cars down here. I saw a ute, I saw a family that was obviously looked like they were very in distress and upset about things. Yeah, it's quite sad, especially when you come around the corner and you see, a bunch of people here, looking in the grass and looking for evidence and that.
Another neighbour, Annabelle Salemomo, says apart from the odd fast car, St George's Road is very safe.
People are pretty worried, just coming through, checking on the neighbours and stuff, seeing if everyone's alright. Nothing happens here other than the odd sound of cars racing and that, but other than that, no, we're pretty quiet.
Another man who lives just off St George's Road says he's disturbed by what's happened, but crime isn't uncommon in the area.
I see the usual car break-ins. I think at one point a street was on Police 10-7 regarding a firearms offence a few years back.
Acting Detective Senior Sergeant Mark Franich says police are investigating the woman's death, but at this point there is no evidence linking it to the burglary. However, he says police will have more information once a post-mortem has been completed in the next few days. This is Katie Doyle.
An immigration lawyer is warning against giving officials more power following the release of a report today into how convicted Czech drug smuggler Karel Schubeck was granted residency. The report by Mike Heron QC recommends future decisions should only go to the immigration minister as a last resort. And in those circumstances, the minister should expect free and frank advice. The minister, Ian Lees-Galloway, came under fire for his decision to grant Karel Schubeck residency, a decision which he later reversed after the opposition began drip-feeding information about Schubeck's checkered past. Hamish Cardwell spoke to lawyer Richard Small, who says it's a bad idea to change policy based on high-profile cases like Schubeck's.
There were particular problems with the Schubeck case that are unique to high-profile cases, but it's important we don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. We need to continue to have reasonable access to someone independent outside of Immigration New Zealand as a last resort. And the devil is in the detail, but I am concerned at the idea that the suggestion that there isn't already a very significant filtering process before any case gets before the minister, that just isn't correct. Already, most cases go to a delegated decision maker. They are senior immigration managers, and as Mr. Heron QC has said, they are very experienced. But there's one unique quality that is lacking, and that sometimes is independence, particularly when there has been quite a contested series of events of unfairness from Immigration New Zealand that has got people in that position. And that's where I think we still need the minister standing outside the organisation and looking in on behalf of the public and the public interest.
So you don't agree that it's a good idea to kind of empower officials more going forward?
I think they're already very significantly empowered, and to some degree that's appropriate, but I would be very wary of concreting over what is already a very strong glass ceiling. Many cases are bounced down just by the private secretary, who is not a very senior immigration manager, without any consideration of the merits. And again, it's really important that we don't create unintended consequences on the basis of a couple of high-profile cases. So I'm in favour of keeping access to the minister and being very clear about what last resort means, because there are cases that have already been in the hands of the immediate circle of the managers who then, as DDMs, refuse them. I'm saying that's unfair, and that there is a lack of transparency on occasions, that we have multiple complaints about alerts and other background material so-called withheld under security grounds not being disclosed, and you need someone independent in the system, and I'm concerned that this removes another layer of independent scrutiny.
Immigration lawyer Richard Small speaking to Hamish Cardwell there. And we're getting plenty of feedback on this story. It's 6:15. You're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. Let's just read one of them, this one from Harry. Ian Lees-Galloway had the information and access to expert advice. He ignored that and should have been sacked. Of more concern is Jacinda Ardern defending the indefensible. She probably means well, but it's actually just weak, says Harry. Turkey's military has struck the Syrian-Iraqi border to prevent Kurdish forces using the route to reinforce northeast Syria. Turkish troops are finalising plans to advance into northeast Syria after the US began withdrawing troops after an abrupt policy shift by the US President Donald Trump. CNN's Clarissa Ward reports.
A show of force from Turkey today, with heavy military machinery and personnel along its border with Syria, as it prepares a possible strike on areas controlled by a key U.S. ally, Syrian Kurds.
We can come any night without warning.
The Kurds could be left exposed after President Trump announced U.S. forces in the area are being withdrawn. Today, the former top U.S. general in the Middle East, Joseph Votel, writing in The Atlantic, said the abrupt policy decision to seemingly abandon our Kurdish partners could not come at a worse time.
For me, the overall sentiment is one of disappointment. Disappointment that we're letting down our partners, perhaps adding to the humanitarian disaster in this region.
A sentiment echoed by Kurdish leaders.
This move or green light that Trump gave to Erdogan will actually complicate the crisis in the region and will provide the Islamic State with an opportunity to regenerate and control areas such as Raqqa and Deir ez-Zor.
With Trump's usual allies in the Republican Party now condemning his decision, the president took to Twitter again today to defend pulling out U.S. forces, tweeting, "We may be in the process of leaving Syria," he said, "but in no way have we abandoned the Kurds, who are special people and wonderful fighters."
We've told Turkey, I spoke with President Erdogan of Turkey, and I said, got to treat him good.
He says his decision to withdraw the last U.S. troops from Syria is firm. The question is what happens next, and whether his warnings to President Erdogan will be enough to stop Turkey launching an all-out assault on a key U.S. ally in the region.
And that was Clarissa Ward reporting. To Australia now, and two huge bushfires have now merged in northern New South Wales, creating a fire ground almost 100 kilometres long. The dangerous combination of westerly winds and intense heat saw the flames destroy or damage 30 homes, mostly around the town of Rappville. The ABC's Bronwyn Herbert reports.
Soot-covered residents from the village of Rappville arrived at the evacuation centre, many still grappling with the fact they had lost their home and all their possessions.
We lost everything, mate. What I've got on, that's what I've got. You know, I'm not just the only one. There's other people around has too, so we just got to stick together and still alive and still got a good community, and we'll see what happens.
The fires in the far north of New South Wales picked up yesterday with winds of up to 80 kilometres an hour and a record high October temperature in Casino of 41 degrees. The Busby's Flat Fire, just to the south of Casino, sent an inferno of flames towards the villages of Rappville and Ewingar.
Everything's gone. Fencing, cattle. My house is gone, the brick of the home's gone.
Early this morning, the Busby's Flat Fire joined with the Long Gully Fire, which had been burning for a month, creating a mammoth fire scar. The fire now stretches almost 100 kilometres from Drake and the Clarence River in the west all the way to Bungawalbin Creek near the town of Woodburn on the Pacific Highway. The mayor of the Richmond Valley Shire says locals are still trying to work out how many homes have been lost to the bushfire. Robert Musto says the timber mill was also lost, but locals twice saved the Rappville pub when it caught on fire. He says it's a tough time for everyone.
I'm broken, I really am. As I said, we're a resilient lot. My heartfelt feelings go out for our community.
The Rural Fire Service has had 1,000 firefighters on the ground across the several blazes burning in the north. RFS Deputy Commissioner Rob Rogers says the gusty winds and yesterday's ferocious heat challenged their efforts.
We're just making sure we know what properties were lost and damaged, making sure people are accounted for, and just making sure we understand and try and get those areas as safe as we can so people that haven't lost their homes can return. There's power lines still down, there's a lot of trees falling down, so there's a lot of work to do.
He says fire investigators are looking at how the fire started and whether it was embers blowing ahead to the east from the massive fire at Long Gully that created the new blaze. There are also heartwarming stories emerging, including how a tweet to the Rural Fire Service managed to save a couple who were hiding in a shed at Rappville. Carol Duncan says her father John and his partner Cass were in trouble, but firefighters managed to help them escape just in time.
Bronwyn Herbert reporting there. The Greater Wellington Regional Council is being urged to establish a blue belt to protect the region's entire coast. The idea, similar to protections made by the city's green belt on land, is being pushed by a candidate running for council. Thomas Nash says it's the responsibility of the regional councils to safeguard Wellington's waterways and marine life. While many of the other candidates back the idea, some are concerned about its impact on fishing. Harry Locke has more.
A blue belt for Wellington isn't a new idea. Environmentalists were campaigning for the City Council to implement such a plan in 2013. But the City Council says even though it's still on their long-term plan, it's been put down in the pecking order behind freshwater initiatives. Now the idea is getting political support at the Regional Council, with candidate Thomas Nash wanting to see the idea revitalised.
Think about the green belt or the town belt in Wellington, and that is essentially a plan for managing that land for various purposes. Obviously, this blue belt would probably be less strict in terms of restrictions on activities, but it would have the same purpose for a really important resource that has intrinsic value for all of us to enjoy.
The blue belt would extend for all 8,000 square kilometres of ocean the Regional Council presides over, from Otaki on the west coast to Castle Point on the east. Mr Nash says the recent example of Moatiti Island in the Bay of Plenty has placed the onus on regional councils to cater for culturally and ecologically significant areas. In that instance, the local community approached their regional council, requesting several areas around their island were given a status of marine protected area. But when the council refused, citing the Fisheries Act, that community took the council to court and won. Mr Nash says the outcome of that court case, which has since been appealed, means that regional councils have a responsibility to protect biodiversity hotspots and mana whenua interests in waters as they do on land. Technical advisor of the Moatiti Rohe Moana Trust, Te Atarangi Sayers, says other communities will be heard because of it.
I'm totally hopeful that this process will help communities inform the values that are significant to them. And for the first time, I think we now have an opportunity as communities at a regional level to be able to inform the appropriateness of activities.
In a written statement to RNZ, Chief Executive of Fisheries Inshore NZ Dr Jeremy Helson said the fishing industry is consistent in their support for measures that protect the marine environment. But he criticised Mr Nash for his interpretation of the Moatiti Island example. Dr Helson said the Fisheries Act, which Mr Nash described as favouring commercial fishing interests, remains the proper legal tool to manage adverse effects posed by fishing. Amongst fellow candidates, however, Mr Nash has the support of current Regional Councillor Roger Blakely.
Restoring the fragile ecosystems on rocky reefs. It could revive the abundance of sea life. It could bring about more visits from whales and dolphins and penguins. Lots of benefits for the marine ecology of our coastal areas.
Fellow councillor Darren Ponta says while he supports such a plan, the fishing industry needs to be considered.
We do need to be conscious of commercial fishers, recreational fishers and recreationalists, but we have found accommodations elsewhere in the country and there's no reason why we can't continue to do that in the Wellington region.
Of the 23 candidates standing for the Wellington constituency alongside Mr Nash, RNZ spoke to 18. And while some said it shouldn't be a priority, nearly all of them were unequivocally supportive. For Checkpoint, Harry Locke.
The Rugby World Cup, of course, is taking place in Japan, and while there are many New Zealand pro players and coaches plying their trade in the country, there aren't many Kiwi kids doing the same. However, one Hawke's Bay export is making waves on the Japanese scene for a multitude of reasons. Warner Dearns is a lock in the first 15 for his high school north of Tokyo, as well as playing in rep rugby teams. Rugby reporter Joe Porter caught up with Dearns, the son of former Silver Ferns netballer Tanya Dearns, who moved to Kashiwa with his dad, a trainer for the Green Rockets top league team.
Obviously I stand out quite a lot. I'm head and shoulders above most people. Yeah, walking through Tokyo and stuff like that, you get the people that sit and stare a bit. There's quite a bit of interest in it, and the big tall foreigner with blonde hair, it looks very different to what everyone else looks like.
At 17 years old and 6'7", Warner Dearns stands out like a sore thumb in Japan, and while his size is an advantage on the rugby field, it can prove problematic off it.
The cramped up subway trains are the worst. I think that's just horrible. Yeah. And shoulders all up in your neck and everything like that.
Dodging through human traffic is hard for anyone in Tokyo, and saying sumimasen, which means sorry, excuse me, is a common occurrence. However, Dearns' size gives him an edge when push comes to shove. As a big lad, how did you find moving around? A lot of sumimasen?
Yeah, a lot of it. When we first got here, it was sort of everything was sorry, excuse me. Yeah. Eventually, you learn to be a bit like them and be a little bit rude in walking through the station. You have to be a little bit rude because otherwise you're just dodging people. So you'd find sometimes when you're walking through the station, you'll get a couple of rude people who just like, I'm going to go this way, you're going to get out of my way. Obviously, I'm a lot bigger than some of them, so you're going to have to get out of my way, sorry.
Warner has loved his Japanese experience and his new teammates, though the model of high school rugby is intense with training all year round, even under the heat of the summer sun.
Some days it's 38, 39. With the sun glaring down and the reflection off the artificial turf, it's pretty tough.
Training in that heat means a lot of calories get burnt, and Dearns has to consume vast quantities of a Japanese staple to keep the weight on.
A lot of rice, have a kilo of rice just for dinner.
Tasty?
Yeah, no, not particularly, but in the morning you have rice, lunch you have rice, and then dinner you have rice.
And that's where Warner's dad, Grant, comes in. A strength and conditioning coach, he makes sure his son is well fed.
Luckily, I get paid enough to be able to afford food for him. He eats far more than I remember eating at that age, but yeah, he's quite a bit of an expense, to be honest.
Grant and Warner have been in Japan for a couple of years now, while mum Tanya works for Netball Cairns and lives there with her daughter Kyra. Grant says it's harder for him than it is his teenage son.
He's of that age. He doesn't want to talk to parents, and sisters are just annoying. But yeah, for me, we just don't get the daily sort of a wind down with the wife and that. You know, we talk on the phone and through Messenger and all the rest of it. It's not quite the same. You can't spend the same quality time.
Dad Derns has embraced the Japanese culture, though he concedes some things grind his gears.
We appreciate so many things about the Japanese culture that probably a little bit more respect and courtesy. It can be a little bit frustrating at times. We get emails at work about some of our boys riding with one hand on the handlebars rather than two, and people in the society are emailing the company moaning about our rugby players not obeying the bike rules.
Warner harbours dreams of being an All Black and says the love for the world champions runs deep in Japan.
Absolutely loved. It's crazy. When they came over here, they had a camp in Kashiwa. It was crazy. You walk through the station, you just see black jerseys everywhere.
I love the haka too.
Yes. We actually had to do the haka. We had a Kashiwa haka made up. We performed it to 5 of them. It was pretty good.
If he continues on his path, Warner may well end up performing the haka as an All Black himself. In Kashiwa, mō te hōtaka o te ahi pōnei, ko Joe Porter aho.
And Joe Porter's story will go up online and on our Facebook page. It's worth checking out just to see Warner Deans alongside his Japanese teammates, just to see the difference in height and size. Thank you so much for all your thoughtful feedback today on the interview that we did with Anthony Holland, who is the stepfather of Mason Pendris, the young man found dead at Sonoda student accommodation. I want to read this one in, which is quite lengthy. As parents of current students in a hall run by CVL, Campus Village Living, we have had huge concerns all year. Limited contact and limited adults over the age of 30. Our other child went to university-owned warehouse. Miss a meal there without letting them know, and they will remind you that they need to know if you won't be there. I took my child from uni hall today and no one noticed. As parents, we have no idea how to state our concerns to the inquiry. A serious lack of communication, and left wondering if they really want to hear about the lack of pastoral care they are providing. My child, like Mason Pendris, is seemingly only a number. Pay the bills and that will be all, thanks. Grr. I hope this tragedy is never repeated.
RNZ News headlines at 6:30. Campus Living Villages has told Checkpoint that Sonoda Hall of Residence, where a 19-year-old's body lay undiscovered for weeks, has decided with Canterbury University not to accommodate first-year students next year. A disaster insurance forum in Wellington says the government needs to triple the Earthquake Commission's cap on payouts. Immigration officials say the decision to grant a Czech drug smuggler residency was the minister's alone, and a super typhoon forecast to strike Japan in the coming days could disrupt crucial matches at the Rugby World Cup. Those are the headlines. Our next news at 7.
Take the pulse of the day's news every weeknight at 10.
The person suspected of driving the other vehicle is Anne Sakulis. She left the country despite having told police she had no plans to do so.
Live with local, national and international stories as they happen.
Girls could get taken on as a psych nurse at Carrington. All had to wear a little white uniform.